what do you guys think of the Stones coming and playing the Enmore Theatre?
It's great. They're playing in our backyard. Yeah, it's good.
Good.
How far away from here do you guys
10
live?
minutes.
10 minutes away.
When you think of Angus Young, you think of blistering guitar riffs, high-voltage performances, and an unwavering commitment to pure rock and roll. But what you might not know is that the AC/DC legend had zero patience for bands he felt didn't meet his standards. I'm the laziest person you'll ever meet. I do nothing. You know, it's very hard, and especially someone like Bond who's more like, yeah. And we're not talking about small-time acts. Young had some harsh words for some of the biggest names in rock history. Brace yourself, because these takes are as brutal as his guitar solos. The Ramones. While the Ramones were widely celebrated for stripping rock back to its core and revitalizing the genre with a raw, high-energy approach, not everyone was impressed by their minimalist style. Among the skeptics was Angus Young, the iconic lead guitarist of AC/DC, who dismissed the idea that punk was truly revolutionary. To Young, what the Ramones and other punk bands were doing was not groundbreaking, but merely a rehash of what earlier rock acts had already accomplished. He pointed specifically to bands like the Small Faces and the Faces, who in his view had already infused rock with a rough-edged attitude long before punk came along. Young saw punk not as a bold new musical movement, but as a reduction of rock's essence to its most basic and unrefined elements. He argued that punk rockers were simply borrowing the raw, unpolished feel of bands like the Faces and making it their entire identity, without the depth or musical skill that defined their predecessors. While others lauded punk for its rebellious energy and stripped-down sound, Young remained unimpressed. His skepticism toward the genre was particularly evident in his opinion of the Ramones. He famously criticized them, stating bluntly, "I heard one song and it did nothing for me. It felt like my first band when I was 12, which was better." To him, the Ramones' music lacked substance, sounding more like the work of garage band in its earliest stages rather than the output of seasoned musicians. But Young's critique of punk went beyond the Ramones. He took issue with the entire movement, arguing that while punk bands prided themselves on their raw energy, they lacked the technical musicianship that had been a hallmark of earlier rock bands. They can do all that. It's pretty easy for a guy to go up there and do all that, but they can't play, he remarked, dismissing punk's simplistic approach as an easy way out for musicians who lacked real instrumental skills. For Young, rock music had always been about more than just attitude. It required talent, precision, and musicianship. While punk certainly had a rebellious spirit, he felt that it lacked the musical complexity and skill that made bands like the Small Faces, the Faces, and even his own band AC/DC stand out. To him, the rise of punk was not an evolution of rock, but rather a step backward, a movement that prioritized rawness at the expense of true musical ability. Kiss. AC/DC and Kiss were two of the biggest rock bands of the 70s and 80s, both dominating the era with their own unique styles. While both bands thrived in the world of hard rock, they were often compared due to their larger-than-life stage presence and anthemic songs. However, despite the frequent comparisons, Angus Young never held Kiss in high regard. Unlike many bands that embrace theatrics and elaborate performances, Young was a firm believer that rock music should be about pure energy, musicianship, and attitude, not gimmicks or flashy distractions. Throughout his career, Young was vocal about his distaste for bands that prioritized showmanship over substance, and Kiss was a prime example in his eyes. He openly mocked the band for relying on over-the-top stage antics, elaborate costumes, and pyrotechnics, rather than focusing on raw musical talent. While Kiss was known for their makeup, fire-breathing stunts, and blood-spitting performances, Young felt that these elements were merely a way to compensate for a lack of real musical depth. He believed that true rock and roll didn't need distractions. It just needed great riffs, powerful energy, and an undeniable connection with the audience. This fundamental difference in philosophy created a clear divide between the two bands. While Kiss built their brand on spectacle, AC/DC took the opposite approach, stripping everything down to the essentials. Their performances relied on raw power, electrifying guitar work, and high-energy delivery, without the need for elaborate theatrics. Young and AC/DC believed that if a band needed gimmicks to entertain an audience, then their music wasn't strong enough to stand on its own. One of the most telling moments of AC/DC's stance on Kiss came when the opportunity for a joint tour arose. Gene Simmons, the co-founder and bassist of Kiss, later admitted that AC/DC had been offered the chance to tour with them, but they declined. They declined as a band built on theatrics rather than musical credibility. Simmons acknowledged that AC/DC rejected the offer because they felt that Kiss's over-the-top presentation was too far removed from the stripped-down, no-nonsense rock that AC/DC stood for. Despite Kiss's massive commercial success, Young never saw them as musical equals. To him, they represented a version of rock music that was more about image than substance. While millions of fans embraced Kiss's larger-than-life personas and stage antics, Young remained unimpressed, believing that real rock bands didn't need face paint or elaborate stage tricks to command an audience. In the end, both bands carved out their own legacies, but their paths remained distinctly different. Kiss became known as one of the most theatrical rock bands in history, while AC/DC built their reputation on delivering some of the most hard-hitting, straightforward rock anthems ever recorded. And for Angus Young, that distinction was all that mattered, because in his world, rock and roll was about the music, not the spectacle. Deep Purple. Angus Young's disdain for Deep Purple was not just a matter of personal taste. It was shaped by a direct and negative experience that left a lasting impression. This stemmed from a festival appearance at Sunbury where AC/DC and Deep Purple's road crew found themselves at odds. Though details of the conflict have varied over time, the tension was enough to solidify Young's dislike for the band, reinforcing an opinion that had already been forming. Speaking to Guitar World magazine, Young did not hold back in his criticism of Deep Purple, making it clear that he had never been a fan. He recalled attending one of their concerts, expecting a powerful performance from the acclaimed rock band. However, instead of being impressed, he found himself underwhelmed. "I saw Deep Purple live once, and I paid money for it, and I thought, geez, this is ridiculous," he recalled, expressing disappointment at what he perceived as an overrated act. To Young, the band's performance was unconvincing, and he felt that their grandiose stage presence and theatrics were little more than smoke and mirrors. His criticism didn't stop at their live performances. Young made it clear that he had never been drawn to Deep Purple's music in general. "I never liked those Deep Purples or those sort of things. I always hated it," he admitted, dismissing the band's entire approach to rock music. While many saw Deep Purple as one of the most influential bands of the hard rock and early heavy metal era, Young was not among them. Instead, he viewed them as an imitation of superior act. "So I always thought it was a poor man's Led Zeppelin," he said, delivering one of his most cutting remarks. To Young, Deep Purple lacked the authenticity and raw energy that he valued in rock music. While the band had built a reputation for pioneering heavy riffs and virtuosic performances, especially through guitar work of Ritchie Blackmore and the organ mastery of John Lord, Young saw them as overly theatrical and lacking the organic grit that bands like AC/DC embodied. Unlike Deep Purple's often elaborate compositions, AC/DC's music was direct, riff-driven, and built on a no-frills, high-voltage energy that Young believed was the essence of real rock and roll. His criticism also reflected a broader attitude toward the era's emerging trends in rock. While Deep Purple, like Led Zeppelin, was associated with a more technical, sometimes experimental approach to hard rock, Young was a firm believer in the straightforward, blues-infused sound that AC/DC championed. His dismissal of Deep Purple as a poor man's Led Zeppelin indicated not just his personal preference, but a skepticism toward bands that leaned too heavily on technical prowess and grandiose presentation rather than raw power and simplicity. In the decades that followed, Deep Purple continued to be regarded as one of the pioneers of hard rock and heavy metal, while AC/DC carved out its own legendary status with stripped-down, high-energy sound. Despite their parallel careers in rock history, Young's opinion of Deep Purple remained unchanged, one built on both personal experience and a fundamental difference in musical philosophy. Led Zeppelin. Even before AC/DC reached international stardom, Young was bold enough to take shots at bands that were already considered rock royalty. Among the groups he openly criticized was Led Zeppelin, one of the most revered and influential rock bands of all time. While many viewed Led Zeppelin as a groundbreaking act that had redefined the genre, Young had a far less flattering take on their live performances. Speaking to Classic Rock magazine, Young recalled attending a Led Zeppelin concert and being left unimpressed by what he saw. While the band was known for their lengthy improvisational live shows, Young felt that much of the performance was bloated and unexciting. They played for 3 hours, but for 2.5 hours they bored the audience, he remarked bluntly. He found it baffling that a band with such a massive reputation could fail to keep the crowd engaged for the entirety of their show. For Young, Led Zeppelin's approach to live music seemed to lack the fire and urgency that he believed was the essence of great rock and roll. While their concerts were technically impressive, featuring extended solos, complex musical passages, and moments of pure virtuosity, he saw these elements as distractions rather than enhancements. It's sick. They should be the most exciting band in the world, he added, expressing his frustration that a group with such talent and influence could still fall into what he viewed as self-indulgent excess. His criticism wasn't entirely unique. While Led Zeppelin had legions of devoted fans, they were occasionally called out for inconsistent live performances. Some concertgoers felt that their extended jams and sprawling set lists lacked the same tight energy that defined their studio recordings. For Young, this was an unforgivable flaw. He believed that rock and roll should be direct, hard-hitting, and filled with relentless energy, qualities that he felt were missing from Led Zeppelin's live shows. To Young, Led Zeppelin seemed to be mimicking the idea of rock and roll, rather than igniting its true spirit. While they had the look, the aura, and the reputation of a great rock band, their live performances failed to deliver the raw excitement and immediate impact that he valued. His perspective underscored a fundamental difference in musical philosophy. Whereas Led Zeppelin embraced sprawling compositions and elaborate musical exploration, AC/DC built their identity on stripped-down, no-nonsense rock that never lost momentum. Despite their differences, both AC/DC and Led Zeppelin cemented their places in rock history. However, Young's views remained unchanged. He wasn't one to be swayed by reputation alone. For him, a band's greatness was proven on stage night after night by keeping the audience on their feet and delivering an unrelenting, high-energy experience. And by that standard, Led Zeppelin simply didn't make the cut. Bon Jovi. When it comes to rock and roll, few bands have been as fiercely committed to their roots as AC/DC. Throughout their career, they have remained unapologetically loyal to their raw, high-energy sound, never bowing to trends or commercial pressures. This unwavering dedication to no-nonsense rock made them one of the most respected and enduring bands in music history. But it also meant that they had little patience for bands they considered to be inauthentic or overly commercial, especially the glam and hair metal movement of the 1980s. While there is no direct quote from Angus Young specifically targeting Bon Jovi, it's well known that AC/DC as a band had little respect for the glam metal scene that dominated the 80s. Groups like Bon Jovi, Motley Crue, Poison, and Def Leppard became massively popular during this era, bringing a more polished, radio-friendly sound to hard rock. Their music was often characterized by big hooks, slick production, power ballads, and an emphasis on image, elements that AC/DC viewed as the opposite of what real rock and roll should be. For AC/DC, rock was meant to be gritty, straightforward, and built on pure musicianship. They had always prided themselves on being a band that could walk into a studio, plug in their instruments, and deliver the same raw energy that they brought to their live shows. They didn't rely on elaborate stage productions, synthesizers, or image-driven marketing. By contrast, bands like Bon Jovi fully embraced the glitzy, highly produced aesthetic that defined the glam metal era. One of the biggest differences between AC/DC and bands like Bon Jovi was their approach to songwriting and production. While AC/DC stuck to their blues-based, hard-hitting rock formula, Bon Jovi and other glam metal bands often leaned into power. Ballads and polished anthems designed for mainstream radio appeal songs like Living on a Prayer and You Give Love a Bad Name were massive hits, but to rock purists like AC/DC they felt too. Polished too commercialized and ultimately lacking the raw, unfiltered power that defined true rock and roll. Another factor that may have contributed to AC/DC's dismissive attitude toward Bon Jovi was the glam metal scene's emphasis on image. The hair, the flashy outfits, the music videos filled with rock star cliches, all of it was a far cry from AC/DC's stripped-down working-class approach to music. Unlike the spandex-clad bands of the 8s, AC/DC didn't need hairspray or elaborate stage productions to prove their rock and roll credibility. They believed in the power of loud guitars, pounding drums, and high-energy performances Nothing less the Rolling Stones, in a 1977 interview with classic rock magazine, Young openly criticized the Rolling Stones for what he saw as a departure from their rock and roll roots. He expressed frustration that the band, once a defining force in rock music, had begun incorporating more soul and R&B influences into their sound, while many praised the Stones for their musical evolution and willingness to explore different genres. Young was unimpressed. He believed they were moving away from what they did best, playing gritty, hard-edged rock music. The Rolling Stones get up and play soul music these days. This is supposed to be rock and roll. Young stated bluntly, making it clear that he disapproved of the band's direction to him. Rock music had a distinct energy and attitude that should not be diluted with other styles. While he acknowledged the importance of soul music and respected its origins, he felt that it was best left to the artists who had mastered it, leave that to the people who do it best, the black people. He remarked, emphasizing that soul music had deep roots in African-American culture and should be performed by those who truly embodied its essence. Young's critique was not necessarily meant to discredit the talent of the Rolling Stones, but rather to argue that they were at their best when they embraced their rock and blues foundations. He believed that if the band focused on playing the kind of music that had initially made them famous, they would be a hell of a lot better and would feel more comfortable in their performances. In his view, their attempts to branch into other styles felt forced and unnecessary, as they already had a natural gift for playing straight-up rock and roll. His comments reflected his broader philosophy about music. Young was a firm believer in sticking to what one does best throughout AC/DC's career. The band remained fiercely dedicated to their signature sound, never straying far from their blues-based, hard-hitting rock formula. While some criticized AC/DC for being repetitive, Young saw it as staying true to their identity and deliver what fans loved most about them. His critique of the Rolling Stones suggested that he expected the same level of consistency from other legendary rock bands. At the time of Young's comments, the Rolling Stones were in the midst of their own musical evolution. Their sound had expanded beyond the raw blues rock that defined their early years, incorporating elements of funk, disco, and soul as heard on albums like Black and Blue 1976 and Some Girls 1978. While this shift helped them stay relevant in a rapidly changing music landscape, it also drew mixed reactions from longtime fans, some of whom, like Young, wished they would stick to the sound that made them famous. Despite his criticisms, the Rolling Stones and AC/DC would go on to share mutual respect. Over the years, both bands became icons of rock music, each maintaining their own approach to the genre. However, Young's comments from 1977 serve as a reminder of his unwavering dedication to authentic rock and roll. He was never afraid to challenge even the biggest names in music. He felt they were losing sight of what made them great. To Young, the essence of rock was simple, powerful, and unfiltered, and he expected nothing less from the bands that shaped the genre. What do you think of Angus Young's criticism of these bands? Leave us your comments in the section below. We hope you have found this helpful video. Don't forget to leave a like, share, and subscribe to the channel. If you like it, thank you for watching this, and see you in the next videos. Goodbye.